Alabama versus Tennessee college football pick Saturday. Alabama improves to 6-0 after their 24-20 home win to Texas A&M. Crimson Tide was run heavy in the win, compiling 288 yards on 51 carries. They limited the Aggies to just 323 yards, 70 of it on the ground on 25 carries. Bryce Young, doubtful for this game. His backup Jalen Monroe completed 63% in the win, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, but only 5.8 yards per attempt. On the season, he's completing 61%, 5.7 yards per attempt. Now, Tennessee 5-0 after their 40-13 win at LSU, a monster offensive performance in a tough road spot as they gained 502 yards, running for 263 on 49 carries. They did limit the Tigers to 55 yards, rushing on 28 carries. And then Hooker completed 63% of his passes in the win, nearly 9 yards per attempt. Now, this season, Hooker career highs 70% completions, 10.2 yards per attempt. Crimson Tide broke a mold of recent poor road form here by pounding Arkansas a few weeks back. But the Razorbacks had glaring weakness in their secondary. Of course, you have to look at the dominant win here by Tennessee, just being very, very impressive here. The play here will be Tennessee plus 7.5. Auburn versus Ole Miss college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. Auburn fell to 3-3 after their 42-10 road defeat at Georgia. Tigers offense held to only 258 yards in defeat. They struggled defending the run, surrendering 292 rushing yards on 30 carries. Robbie Ashford, a season low of 34% completions, 4.3 yards per attempt. On the year, Ashford, 48% completions, 4 touchdowns, 3 picks, 7.1 yards per attempt. A threat to run, averaging nearly 10 rushes per game with 4.7 yards a carry. Now, Ole Miss 6-0 after their 52-28 road win at Vanderbilt. A season high 591 yards of offense for the Rebels, running for 143 yards on 28 carries. Rebels defense did allow 281 yards to the Commodores on 38 carries. Correct Jackson Dart, a season high 78% completions, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, and 14 yards per attempt. Season wide here, Dart about 64% completions, 9.5 yards per attempt. Recent wins by Ole Miss was by 3 to Kentucky, 7 to Tulsa, with the wins against really down programs like Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech by margin. The play will be Auburn plus 15.5. Clemson versus Florida State college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. Clemson improves to 6-0 after their 31-3 road win at Boston College. Strong defensive performance here for the Tigers in the win, limiting BC to just 254 yards, 34 of it rushing on 30 carries. Clemson finished with 364 yards rushing on 444 yards on 32 attempts. DJ Uiagalelei completed 56% of his passes, and that was a season low, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, and 6.9 yards per attempt. Season-wide, Uiagalelei, 64% completion rate, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks, 7.7 yards per attempt. Florida State, they're 4-2 after their 18-17 road defeat at NC State. Seminoles blew a 17-3 halftime lead. Offense produced 387 yards, 206 of it rushing on 28 carries. They did limit the Wolfpack to only 307 yards, 125 of it passing on 23 attempts. Jordan Travis' season lows here, 50% completion, 6 yards per pass attempt in defeat. He had a touchdown and 2 interceptions. Travis against the ACC, 62% completions, 8.7 yards per attempt. Point production, the concern for the Seminoles here. Tigers have averaged 30 or greater points in all 6 games this season. Play here will be on Clemson at minus 3.5. Iowa State versus Texas college football pick for Saturday. Iowa State fell to 3-3 after their 10-9 home defeat to Kansas State. Season low for the Cyclones as the team produced just 276 yards, and then it was 78 yards of rushing here on 24 carries. And defensively, Cyclones did surrender 257 passing yards on 20 attempts in that one. Hunter Deckers, a season low, 58% completions in the loss, 5.2 yards per attempt. This season, Deckers 67% completions, 6.7 yards per attempt. Texas 4-2 with their 49-zip neutral site win to Oklahoma. It was a season high offensively for the Longhorns, 585 yards. The Longhorns ran for 296 yards on 50 carries. Defense shut down the Sooner offense, allowing 195 yards with 39 passing. Queen Ewers, in his return, completed 68% of his passes, 4 touchdowns, a pick, and 9.3 yards per attempt. Iowa State defense has been outstanding this year. They faced a good defensive team in Alabama at home early in the season, held to 19 points to defeat. Cyclones can move the football through the air. The play here will be Iowa State plus 14.5. LSU versus Florida college football pick Saturday. LSU fell to 4-2 after their 40-13 home defeat to Tennessee. Tigers defense torched on the ground, giving up 263 yards on 49 carries. The LSU run game sputtered with 55 yards on 28 carries. Jane Daniels completed 71% of his passes, 6.7 yards per attempt. On the season, the Arizona State transfer completing 69% of his passes with 6.9 yards per attempt. Florida, they're now 4-2 after a 24-17 home win to Missouri. Gators held to only 297 yards offensively, but the run game produced 231 yards on 32 carries. Defensively, they limited the Tigers to under 4 yards a carry, with 200 passing yards allowed in that one on 30 attempts. Anthony Richardson completed 57% of his passes in the win for only 66 yards with 4.7 yards per attempt. Richardson on the season, a completion rate just under 56%, 5 touchdowns, 7 picks, 8.2 yards per attempt. Gators' subpar offensive production against Missouri, Kentucky, and USF really the concern. Tigers' defense performing better. Florida defense allowing 50% convergence on third down. Play here will be LSU +3. Mississippi State versus Kentucky college football pick for Saturday. Mississippi State moved to 5-1 after their 40-17 home win to Arkansas. Season high offensively for the Bulldogs, 568 yards with 173 rushing on 37 carries. They did allow the Razorbacks 483 yards with 241 rushing on 44 carries. Will Rogers completed 64% of his passes in the win with 3 touchdowns and 8.2 yards per pass attempt. On the season, Rogers' 71% completion rate, 22 touchdowns, 3 picks, and 7.5 yards per attempt. Kentucky 4-2 after their 24-14 home defeat to South Carolina. Wildcats 2 straight losses and a season low 299 yards of offense in defeat. The team ran for only 121 yards on 36 attempts. Will Levis expected to return from injury after missing the loss to South Carolina. On the season, Levis a career high 69% completions, 10 yards per attempt. Got to respect the Wildcats' defensive performance at Ole Miss, losing by 3. Defensively, Kentucky holding teams to just 307 yards of offense here. That's pretty impressive. Play here will be on Kentucky at +4. Oklahoma State versus TCU college football pick. This one here is on Saturday. Oklahoma State moved to 5-0 after their 41-31 home win to Texas Tech. Defense held the Red Raiders to only 7 second-half points. Cowboys gained 434 yards in the win. Defensively, Cowboys did surrender 379 yards, but on 63 passing attempts there. Spencer Sanders hit the quarterback. Season low 49% completion rate, 6.6 yards per attempt. On the season, Sanders, a career low 61% completions, 8.2 yards per attempt. Now that number is 6.5 per attempt in Big 12 play. Now TCU 5-0 after their 38-31 road win at Kansas. Horned Frogs ran for 144 yards on 31 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 540 yards to the Jayhawks with 351 passing on 34 attempts. Max Duggan, 70% completion rate, 9.3 yards per attempt. Career highs this year for Duggan with 73% completions, 10.3 yards per attempt. Duggan against the Big 12 here, 70% completions, 9.2 per attempt. Now, Horned Frogs doing a better job on the ground and getting better work from Duggan in conference play. The player will be TCU -3.5. Penn State and Michigan college football pick. This one is on Saturday. Penn State moved to 5-0 after their 17-7 home win to Northwestern. Was a season low offensively for the Lions as they gained 360 yards. They ran it 58 times for 220 yards. Penn State limited the Wildcats to only 241 yards on the game, 31 rushing on 28 carries. Sean Clifford completed a season low 50% of his passes, 7 yards per attempt, but that was in raining conditions. The senior quarterback is completing 62% of his passes for 7.5 yards per attempt. Michigan 6-0 after their 31-10 road win at Indiana. Good offensive performance for the Wolverines, gaining 469 yards with 165 rushing on 40 carries. They limited the Hoosiers to only 222 yards, 19 of it rushing on 25 carries. J.J. McCarthy completed 78% in the win, 3 touchdowns, a pick for 8.4 yards per attempt. It was a 4-point win for Michigan in their meeting last year on the road. Respecting the Lions wins at Purdue and Auburn this season as Clifford looked poised in each win. The player will be Penn State at +7. USC versus Utah college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. USC moved to 6-0 after their 30-14 home win to Washington State. Trojans gained 369 yards with 181 rushing on 40 carries. in that one. They limited the Cougars' passing game to and allowed 144 rushing yards on 29 carries. Caleb Williams, well, season lows here. 52% completions, 6.5 yards per attempt. On the season, though, Williams, 65% completions, 14 touchdowns, a pick, and 8.5 yards per attempt. Now, Utah, they fell to 4-2 after a 42-32 road defeat at UCLA. Utes offense moved the football for 479 yards with 192 on the ground on 43 carries. But it was a defense that was torched here. They gave 502 yards with over 5 yards to carry on the ground, plus 299 passing on 23 attempts. Cameron Rising, 72% completions with a season high 297 yards, but no touchdowns. He did have a pick, and he averaged 9 yards per attempt. Now in the season, Rising, a career high 59% completions, 8.4 yards per attempt. Now the Trojans' offensive performance at Oregon State is a huge concern here. Utes' home stadium really tough on visitors, and the team responds well at home. The player will be Utah at -3.5. Wisconsin versus Michigan State college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Wisconsin moved to 3-3 after their 42-7 road win at Northwestern. Badgers moved the football for 415 yards, running for 193 on 38 carries. They did limit the Wildcats' run offense to 79 yards on 27 carries. Graham Mertz completed 69% of his passes for the season high 299 yards, 5 touchdowns. He averaged 10.3 yards per attempt. In Big Ten play, Mertz is completing 59% of his passes, 7.4 yards per attempt. Now, Michigan State fell to 2-4 after their 49-20 home defeat to Ohio State, a season low 202 yards in defeat for the Spartans with 7 yards rushing on 20 carries. On defense, the Spartans were just absolutely torched, giving up 614 yards total, 377 passing on 28 attempts. Peyton Thorne did complete 61% of his passes for 6.3 yards per attempt. In conference, Thorne is completing 64% of his passes, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks, and only 5.4 yards per attempt. Badgers defense in the better form, and Mertz showing improvement in the passing game to exploit the Spartans' poor pass defense. Play will be Wisconsin here at -7.5. Arkansas versus BYU college football pick Saturday. Arkansas fell to 3-3 after their 40-17 road defeat at Mississippi State. Razorbacks did move the football for 483 yards, and they ran it for 241 on 44 carries. They did sit with a -2 turnover margin, but Arkansas, again, it's that pass defense that done them in here. They gave 395 yards passing on 48 carries. There seems a lot of teams making big plays against them. KJ Jefferson, a season low 43% completion rate with 6.5 yards per attempt. On the season, Jefferson 66% completions, 9.1 yards per attempt. BYU fell to 4-2 after their 28-20 neutral site loss to Notre Dame. Cougars, a season low 276 yards of offense. They did surrender 296 yards to the Fighting Irish with over 5 yards of carry on the ground, 262 passing on 28 attempts. Jaron Hall, a season low 53% completions, 7.1 yards per attempt. On the year, Hall 68% completions, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks, and 8.3 yards per attempt. Back-to-back road games for Arkansas. Cougars do have a home win to a major conference school, Baylor, at home in overtime. Razorbacks pass defense very weak. On the road, the team is allowing 568 yards with 395 passing, 8.2 yards per attempt. The player will be BYU +2. Maryland versus Indiana college football pick for Saturday. Maryland fell to 4-2 after their 31-29 home defeat to Purdue. Terrapin's run game held to 72 yards on 25 carries. They did limit the Boilermakers' run game, but gave up 360 passing yards on 41 attempts. Talia Tagliavoa completed 68% in defeat, 3 touchdowns, a pick, and 8.3 yards per attempt. Season-wide, he is completing 74% of his passes, 8.8 yards per attempt. Indiana 3-3 after their 31-10 home defeat to Michigan. Hoosiers held to only 222 yards offensively. Back-to-back conference games where the Hoosiers held under 300 yards. Indiana had only 19 yards on 29 carries on the ground. Missouri transfer quarterback Connor Bazelak just 51% completions with a season low 4.1 yards per attempt. On the year, Bazelak way down from the past 3 seasons with 52% completion rate for the season, 5.4 yards per attempt. Hoosiers 2-10 as an underdog the past 2 seasons. Indiana just 4 yards per play in the Big Ten games here. The play will be Maryland minus 11. Miami versus Virginia Tech college football pick for Saturday. Miami fell to 2-3 after their 27-24 home defeat to North Carolina. Hurricanes produced 538 yards in defeat, but the run game generated only 42 yards on 24 carries. Hurricanes defense struggled, giving up 470 yards with 309 passing on just 28 attempts. Quarterback Tyler Van Dyke completed 74%, nearly 500 yards of passing for 8.7 yards per attempt. It was an improvement over the past 2 games where he combined for just over 50% passing and less than 5 yards per attempt. Virginia Tech 2-4 after their 45-29 road defeat at Pitt. Hokies defense struggled, surrendering 326 yards rushing to the Panthers on 43 carries. On offense, they averaged just over 4 yards a carry. Grant Wells completed just 53% in the loss with 5.9 yards per attempt on the season. Wells 59% completion rate, 6 touchdowns, 7 picks, 6.2 yards per pass attempt, which is way down from his previous 2 seasons at Marshall. Hokies offense a major concern here. The play here will be Miami minus 7.5. Minnesota versus Illinois college football pick. This one here is on Saturday. Minnesota fell to 4-1 after their 20-10 home defeat to Purdue. Golden Gophers offense struggled with 304 yards, 47 rushing on 26 carries. Defensively, they did surrender 359 yards to the Boilermakers, 160 of it rushing on 27 carries. Tanner Morgan, a season-low 54% completion rate in defeat with no touchdowns, 3 picks, and 7.8 yards per pass attempt. On the season, Morgan a career-high 70% completions with 10.2 yards per attempt. Illinois 5-1 after their 9-6 home win to Iowa. Final Illini ran for 201 yards on 44 carries. Defense limited Hawkeyes to only 222 yards, 52 rushing on 30 carries. Rutgers transfer quarterback Artur Sitkowski completed 68% of his passes with a pick and only 3.9 yards per attempt. On the season, Sitkowski 72% completions but only 4.1 yards per attempt. In this one, we will look here. Well, let's see who we're going to go with in this one. That's a good question because I was going back and forth with this game. Minnesota is a team that had their struggles running the football. Illini is a good defensive team. So we're going to go under total in this one. Under total here between Golden Gophers and Final Illini. NC State versus Syracuse college football pick. This one here is on Saturday. NC State improved to 5-1 after their win here to Florida State. Another light offensive game here for the Wolfpack as they gained just 307 yards. Now, NC State was run heavy, rushing for 182 yards on 46 carries. They defended the pass well, but surrendered 206 rushing yards on 28 carries. Devin Leary is doubtful with an upper body injury. Now, Charleston Southern transfer Jack Chambers threw 1 pass in relief, but ran 11 times for 46 yards. On the season, he's completing just 43% of his passes with 3.4 yards per attempt. He completed only 55% with Charleston Southern last year and ran it 135 times for just 3.5 yards per rush. Syracuse 5-0 after their 59-0 home win to FCS Wagner. That was behind 631 yards. Quarterback Garrett Schrader on the season is completing career highs here. 71%, 9.6 per attempt. Good results in conference action against Louisville and Virginia. Quarterback situation concern here for NC State. Syracuse getting good production as well from the ground game at 4.7 yards per rush. The player will be Syracuse at -3. Nebraska versus Purdue college football pick for Saturday. Nebraska 3-3 after their 14-13 road win at Rutgers. It was a season-low 304 yards of offense for the Cornhuskers, who had to rally from a 13-0 halftime deficit. Cornhuskers ran for only 72 yards on 29 carries. On defense, they did limit the Scarlet Knights' run game to 115 yards on 38 carries. Casey Thompson completed 67% of his passes, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and a season-low 6.4 yards per attempt. On the season, Thompson at 65% completions, 8.3 yards per attempt. Purdue, they're 4-2 after their 31-29 road win in their game here. Boilermakers finished against Maryland. It was Boilermakers finished with 373 offensive yards, but only 13 yards rushing on 34 carries. On defense, Purdue did limit the Terrapins' run game and surrendered 315 passing yards on 38 attempts. Boilermakers successfully defended a 2-point conversion with 35 seconds left to preserve the win. Back-to-back road games for Nebraska. Cornhuskers do give up a lot of big plays in the passing game, so the play here will be on Purdue minus 13.5. North Carolina versus Duke, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. North Carolina 5-1 after their 27-14 road win at Miami. Tar Heels moved the football for 470 yards, 161 rushing on 43 carries. Defensively, UNC held the Hurricanes to under 2 yards per rush, but allowed 496 passing yards on 57 attempts. Drake May completed 68% of his passes, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, 11 yards per attempt. Now, in his 2 conference games, a 70% completion rate, 10.5 yards per attempt. Duke, they're 4-2 after their 23-20 road overtime defeat at Georgia Tech. A season low 278 yards for the Blue Devils with 142 rushing on 33 carries. Duke allowed 412 yards, 180 rushing on 37 carries. Now, Riley Leonard, a season low 47% completions, 3.2 yards per attempt. Back-to-back road games for the Tar Heels. Now, North Carolina on the road giving up 536 yards, 4.7 yards per rush, 71% completion rates for nearly 9 yards per attempt. The play here will be on Duke at +7. Stanford versus Notre Dame, college football pick for Saturday. Stanford fell to 1-4 after their 28-27 home defeat to Oregon State. Conroe run game stalled with 90 yards on 27 carries. They gave up a 56-yard touchdown pass with 13 seconds remaining in defeat. Stanford defense did allow 442 yards to the Beavers with 192 rushing on 40 carries. Tanner McKee completed 62% of his passes, 8.4 yards per attempt, and 2 touchdowns. On the year, McKee 64% completions, 8.2 yards per attempt. Notre Dame improved to 3-2 with their 28-20 neutral site win to BYU. Another good offensive performance for the Fighting Irish, posting 496 yards and rushing for 234 yards on 45 carries. Strong defensive performance here, giving up 276 yards to the Cougars. Drew Pine, season highs in the win, 78% completions, 9.4 yards per attempt, and he threw for 3 touchdowns and a pick. A huge low for the Cardinal in defeat with that botched double-team coverage, allowing the winning touchdown. Stanford has lost both road games by 18 points at Washington and Oregon, with a defense getting torched here, getting up an average of 496 yards, 7.5 yards per rush. They're also giving up 5.5 sacks a game in their road games as well. The play here will be Notre Dame here at -17. Tulane versus USF college football pick. This one here is on Saturday. Tulane 5-1 after their 24-9 home win to East Carolina. Green Wave moved the football for 391 yards, only 41 rushing on 32 carries. On defense, Tulane allowed just 280 yards passing, but on 52 pass attempts, they did pick off 2 passes. Michael Pratt in the win, 79% completion for a season high, 326 yards, 2 touchdowns, 9.6 yards per pass attempt. On the season, Pratt a career high, 67.7% completions, 9.5 yards per attempt. USF 1-5 after their 28-24 road defeat at Cincinnati. Bulls did move the football for 363 yards. They ran the ball well against the Bearcats with 224 yards on 43 carries. Defensively, they did surrender 221 rushing yards on 37 carries. Baylor transfer quarterback Gary Bohannon completed only 52% of his passes, 6.6 yards per attempt, but got 2 touchdowns. On the year, a 55% completion rate, 6.3 yards per attempt. Bohannon has shown improvement when facing AAC competition. Tulane not generating a lot of points in their games of late. Bulls are running for 5.2 yards. The carry play here will be on USF at +12. Vanderbilt versus Georgia college football pick Saturday. Vanderbilt fell to 3-3 after their 52-28 home defeat to Ole Miss. Commodores were competitive for half. Defensively, the Commodores allowed 591 yards, 448 passing on 32 carries. Vanderbilt offense did move the football for 403 yards. Quarterback A.J. Swan completed 71% of his passes in defeat, 281 yards, 7.4 yards per attempt. Georgia 6-0 with their 42-10 home win to Auburn. Bulldogs rolled up 500 yards with 292 rushing on 39 carries. Defensively, they limited the Tigers to 258 yards. Quarterback Stetson Bennett completed 69% in the win with a season low of 6.5 yards per attempt. The run game generated 292 yards on 39 carries. Commodores held to a total of 6 points in their past 2 meetings, with the Bulldogs. Play here will be Georgia at -38. Washington State versus Oregon State college football pick Saturday. Washington State fell to 4-2 after their 30-14 road defeat at USC. Cougars on the road against another low offensive output. 316 yards, 144 rushing on 29 carries. Defensively, Washington State allowed 181 yards rushing on 40 attempts. Cameron Ward, season lows here. 59% completions, 5.4 yards per attempt. And that was now Ward here against the conference is completing 69% of his passes, 7.4 yards per attempt. Oregon State, they're 4-2 after a 28-27 road win at Stanford. Miracle 56-yard touchdown pass with 13 seconds remaining for the game winner, as really Stanford really botched their double coverage. Beavers ran for 192 yards on 40 carries. On defense, they limited the Cardinal on the ground but allowed 269 passing yards on 34 attempts. Bennett Bronson, a strong performance here, 71% completion rates, 8.9 yards per attempt, and 2 touchdowns. Season 1, Bronson, 66% completions, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and 9 yards per attempt. Now, in the Cougars' 2 road games, they've averaged only 284 yards. Bronson has been an improvement over Chance Nolan, the quarterback. To play here, Oregon State minus the 3.5. Air Force versus UNLV college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Air Force fell to 4-2 after their 34-27 road defeat at Utah State. Falcons rushed for 264 yards on 55 carries. Defensively, they did allow 414 yards to the Aggies with 19 rushing on 38 carries. Zeke Daniels completed just 42% of his passes here, a touchdown pick, and 7.9 yards per attempt. On the season, Daniels here, a career low 47% completion rate, 10 yards per attempt. UNLV, they dropped to 4-2 after a 40-7 road defeat at San Jose State. A season low 213 yards here for the in this one here for the Rebels as they were down 33-zip here late in the third quarter. Rebels' ground game here pretty much was grounded. 52 yards on 27 carries. On defense, UNLV allowed 433 yards to the Spartans with 203 rushing on 36 carries. Quarterback Doug Brumfield is questionable and was knocked out early in the loss at San Jose State. Sophomore quarterback Cameron Friel in relief, 68% completion, 7 yards per attempt. UNLV quarterback issues and they just couldn't stop the Spartans' run game last week. The play here will be Air Force and UNLV to go under 50. Arizona versus Washington college football pick Saturday. Arizona drops to 3-3 after their 49-22 home defeat to Oregon. Wildcats defense was absolutely torched here. 560 yards allowed, 306 rushing on 41 carries, and they also allowed 274 passing yards on 29 attempts. Wildcats had a negative turnover margin of -3. Jaden DeLara hit a conference low 57% of his passes, 5.7 yards per attempt. Now against the Pac-12, DeLara, 63% completion rate, 8.5 yards per attempt. Washington fell to 4-2 with their 45-38 road defeat at Arizona State. Huskies finished with 458 yards in the game, 134 rushing on 33 carries. On defense, they allowed 5 yards to carry on the ground, plus 241 passing yards on 30 attempts. Indiana transfer quarterback Michael Penix did complete 62% of his passes with a pick and a season-low 5.9 yards per attempt. His interception was returned for an ASU touchdown. Now in Pac-12 play, Penix 63% completions, 7 yards per pass attempt. Against the Pac-12, the Wildcats averaging 520 yards a game, and the defense giving up 506. Huskies in conference throwing for 326 yards a game and giving up 422 yards with 282 passing for 9.5 yards per attempt. Play here will be on Arizona, Washington to go over total of 73. Arkansas State versus Southern Miss college football pick. This one goes off Saturday. Arkansas State fell to 2-4 after their 42-20 home defeat to James Madison. It was a season low 267 yards of offense for the Red Wolves with 20 rushing yards on 20 carries. Red Wolves were crushed defensively, giving up 598 yards, 394 passing on 37 attempts. Florida State transfer James Blackman completed 61% in the loss with 2 touchdowns and 9.5 yards per attempt. Season-wide, Blackman at 68% completion rate, 9 touchdowns, 1 pick, and 8.1 yards per attempt. Southern Miss 2-3 with their 27-10 road defeat at Troy. Golden Eagles season low 205 yards of offense with 48 rushing on 26 carries. Defensively, they did give up 237 yards on only 24 attempts. Zach Wilkie in defeat completed at 54%, had a touchdown, 3 picks, only 4.5 yards per pass attempt. For the season, Wick, a 58% completion rate, 6.3 yards per attempt. Now, Redwoods, they're struggling with their ground game, just 2 yards per carry over the past 3 games. Also concerning is in this period is a Redwoods pass defense, which is allowing 270 yards over this span with 9.1 yards per attempt. The play here will be Southern Miss at minus the 4.5. Buffalo versus Massachusetts. College football pick for Saturday. Buffalo 3-3 after their 38-7 road win at Bowling Green. Bulls a strong offensive performance in the win with 466 yards. Strong rushing attack for the Bulls as they gained 280 yards on 52 carries. They limited the Falcons just 99 rushing yards on 29 carries and benefited from a +3 turnover margin. Cole Snyder completed 63% of his passes with 9 yards per attempt. On the season, Snyder completing 60%, 6.9 yards per attempt. UMass dropped to 1-5 after their 42-24 home defeat to Liberty. Another poor offensive performance for the Minutemen, 233 yards. They've been held to under 300 yards in all 6 games. Defensively, UMass did give up 259 passing yards on 23 attempts. Garrett DeZuro is questionable with a knee injury that was bent the wrong way against Liberty. Gino Campiotti in relief last week, just 1 of 7 passing, 5 yards. He did lose his job. Cap Must probably will be back in this spot due to the injury. On the season, Capiati, 44% completions, a touchdown, 6 picks, and a miserable 3.5 yards per attempt. Bulls offense has shined in their past 2 road games at Bowling Green and Eastern Michigan. The play here will be Buffalo minus 16.5. California versus Colorado college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. Cal fell to 3-2 after their 28-9 road defeat at Washington State. Another poor offensive showing for the Golden Bears on the road, finishing with just 311 yards. They ran it 31 yards on 24 carries. Defensively, Cal gave up 343 yards, passing on 40 attempts. Purdue transfer quarterback Jack Plummer completed nearly 70% of his passes for 8.3 yards per attempt. Colorado 0-5 after their 43-20 road defeat at Arizona. Buffalo's defense get torched again, giving up 673 yards, 495 passing on 49 attempts. They gave up over 5 yards a carry in the game, and they ran for over 5 yards a carry in defeat. Freshman quarterback Owen McCown completed just 47% of his passes with 6.2 yards per attempt. And of course, Colorado, the head coach here, was fired following the loss. Over the past 3 games, the Buffs defense giving up 562 yards, 6.3 yards per rush, 9.5 per pass attempt. In this period, Cal is running for 5.3 yards a carry. The play here will be California, Colorado over 48 points. Central Michigan versus Akron college football pick here for Saturday. Central Michigan, they moved to 1-5 after their 17-16 home defeat to Ball State. Third straight game where Chippewas were held to under 20 points. Team moved the football for only 340 yards. Running game produced only 130 yards on 49 carries. One of the 2 fumbles by CMU was returned for a Ball State touchdown. Defense limited the Cardinals to just 250 yards, 122 passing on 27 attempts. Quarterback Daniel Richardson, a season low 47% completion rate, 1 touchdown, 5.3 yards per attempt. On the year, Richards a career low 55% completion, 6.1 yards per attempt, way down from last season. Akron 1-5 off their 55-34 road defeat at Ohio. Zips did move the football for 487 yards, but the run game sputtered with 69 yards on 25 carries. Defensively, Akron gave it up in the passing yardage share, 427 yards allowed passing on 27 attempts. Quarterback DJ Irons, a season high 76% completions, a pick, 7.7 yards per attempt. On the year, the Irons hitting on 67%, 6.6 yards per attempt. Now, Akron's defense has been poor this season, giving up 5 yards a carry on the ground and 10.1 yards per pass attempt. CMU has shown the ability to move the football through the air, and the Zips offense has improved under Irons. The play here will be Central Michigan and Akron over 58.5. Charlotte versus UAB college football pick. This one is on Saturday. Charlotte fell to 1-4 after their 41-35 home defeat to UTEP. 49ers defense struggled defending the Miners' run game, giving up 252 yards on 45 carries. Team had a -2 turnover margin and gave up a 100-yard fumble recovery for a touchdown and a 13-yard fumble recovery for a TD. Chris Reynolds, a season low 57% completions, 4 touchdowns, a pick, 9.4 yards per attempt. On the season, Reynolds, a career high here, 64% completion rate, 8.6 yards per attempt. UAB 3-2 after their 41-14 home win to Middle Tennessee State, a season high 581 yards offensively with dominance on the ground with 303 yards on 38 carries. Blazers limited the Blue Raiders passing game just 196 yards on 43 attempts. Dylan Hopkins, 63% completion rate in the win with 10.3 yards per attempt. On the season, Hopkins, 67% completions, 9.4 yards per attempt. Charlotte defense gave up 539 yards, 5.8 yards per attempt, 11.3 yards per pass attempt. The play will be UAB at minus the 23.5. James Madison versus Georgia Southern college football pick Saturday. James Madison 5-0 after their 42-20 road win at Arkansas State. Dukes moved the football for 598 yards in victory. They ran it 43 times for 204 yards. On defense, they limited the Red Wolves to just 267 yards, 20 of it rushing on 27 carries. Todd Centeio, season highs here, nearly 76% completion rate, 10.6 yards per attempt, passing for 384 yards in victory. On the season, Centeio, 66% completions, 15 touchdowns, a pick, 9.3 yards per attempt. Georgia Southern 3-3 after their 41-33 road defeat at Georgia State. Eagles moved the football for 451 yards, running for only 92 on 28 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 521 yards to the Panthers with 335 rushing on 54 carries. 5 turnovers for the Eagles. Now, Buffalo transfer quarterback Kyle Ventrese completed 61% of his passes in the loss, 3 touchdowns, but 4 picks, 7.3 yards per attempt. On the season, Ventrese, about 61% completion rate, 13 touchdowns, 11 picks, 6.8 yards per attempt. Now, Duke's defense holding teams at 227 yards. Eagles' defense here surrendering 456 yards, 5.6 yards per rush here. So the player will be James Madison here at minus the 11.5. Kent versus Toledo college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. Kent fell to 2-4 after their 27-24 road defeat at Miami, Ohio. Golden Flashes run just 109 yards on 35 carries. Defensively, they struggled against the run, surrendering 236 yards on 50 carries to the Redhawks. Colin Schley completed 57% of his passes in the loss, 7.7 yards per attempt. On the season, 61% completion rate, 9.1 yards per attempt. Toledo improved to 4-2 after their 52-32 road win at Northern Illinois. They built a 45-7 lead after 3 quarters. 2 Rockets touchdowns by way of interception return, and they finished with a +4 turnover margin. On defense, Toledo limited NIU on the ground and gave up 284 passing yards on 49 attempts. DeQuan Finn completed 68% in the win, 3 touchdowns, a season high 8.8 yards per attempt. In his MAC games, Finn completing 62%, 8.4 yards per attempt. Now, Schley is moving the football downfield in the passing game, and the Golden Flash is running for 4.6 yards per attempt. The play here will be on Kent, +9. Louisiana Tech versus North Texas college football pick for Saturday. Louisiana Tech improved to 2-3 after their 41-31 home win to UTEP. Bulldogs gained 380 yards with pedestrian 114 rushing yards on 33 carries. Defensively, they did surrender 501 yards to UTEP with 320 passing on 51 carries. Parker McNeil, a season high 67% completions in the win, 4 touchdowns, 9.9 yards per attempt. On the year, McNeil 57% completions, 8.5 yards per attempt. North Texas 3-3 after their 45-28 home win to FAU. Another strong offensive performance here for the Mean Green. 481 yards total, 300 rushing on 51 carries. Defensively, they limited the Owls' run game and surrendered 295 passing yardage on 50 attempts. Austin Ani, a career-high 70% completions in the win, 9 yards per attempt. Now, season-wide, Ani, just 56% completions, 15 touchdowns, 7 picks, but 8.5 yards per attempt. Now, these are 2 defenses struggling to stop the run. This opens up things for both teams to excel in the passing game. The play here will be Louisiana Tech and North Texas over 68. Memphis versus East Carolina college football pick for Saturday. Memphis moved to 4-2 after the 33-32 home defeat to Houston. Tigers gave up the final 14 points with just over a minute left. They did move the football for 438 yards, with 156 of it rushing on 41 carries. On defense, the Tigers gave up 366 passing yards on 58 attempts. Seth Hennigan completed 65% in the win, 7.5 yards per attempt. On the season, Hennigan 63% completion rate, 10 touchdowns, 1 pick, 7.7 yards per attempt. East Carolina drops to 3-3 after their 24-9 road defeat at Tulane. Pirates did move the football for 419 yards. Defensively, they limited the Green Wave run game but allowed 350 passing yards on 35 attempts. Holton Ahlers completed 63% in defeat, but a season-low 5.6 yards per attempt with a touchdown and 2 interceptions. His season number is 67% completions with a career-high 8.1 yards per attempt. Pirates have the more balance to their offense with 5.2 yards per rush. Ahlers' improvement during the senior year also key. The play here will be East Carolina at minus the 5.5. Miami, Ohio versus Bowling Green college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Miami, Ohio moves to 3-3 after their 27-24 home win to Kent. Strong running here for the Red Hawks. 236 yards rushing on 50 carries. Defensively, they did allow 306 passing yards on 40 attempts. Quarterback Avion Smith completed a season-high 64% in the win with 12.8 yards per attempt. On the season, Smith 52% completions, 6 touchdowns, 4 picks, 6.1 yards per attempt. Bowling Green falls to 2-4 after their 38-7 home defeat to Buffalo. Falcons fell behind 31-0 at the half. They did surrender 479 yards to the Bulls with 293 rushing on 49 carries. Matt McDonald completed 50% in the loss with 6.7 yards per attempt. On the season, McDonald 56% completion rate, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks, 6.4 yards per attempt. McDonald has shown the ability to get touchdown passes. Now, pass offense too poor to lay a touchdown with the Red Hawks here on the road. The play will be Bowling Green +7. Nevada versus Hawaii college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Nevada moved to 2-4 after their 17-14 home defeat to Colorado State. Wolfpack a season high against an FBS team this year with 358 yards. On defense, they did allow 177 rushing yards on 33 carries, but shut down the passing game with 78 yards on 22 attempts. Nate Cox just 47% completions, high volume passing performance, just 5.8 yards per attempt. On the season, Cox 54% completions, 6.1 yards per attempt. Now, Hawaii, they dropped to 1-5 after a 16-14 road defeat at San Diego State. Rainbows moved the football for 312 yards. They did limit the Aztecs' run game to 95 yards on 35 carries. Hawaii did surrender 322 passing yards on 36 attempts. Now, Braden Shager, 59% completions and loss with a touchdown and 5.8 yards per attempt. On the season, Shager, 58% completions, 6 yards per attempt. Now, Hawaii defense getting a little pressure on the quarterback, and they're giving up 6.3 yards per rush. The play here will be Nevada minus the 6.5. New Mexico versus New Mexico State college football pick. This one is on Saturday. New Mexico is at 2-4 after their 27-14 home defeat here to Wyoming. Lobos could gain only 319 yards of offense, running for 197 yards on 48 carries. They did limit the Cowboys to 314 yards with only 130 rushing on 39 carries. A -3 turnover margin for UNM. Miles Kendrick, 65% completion rate in defeat with a pick and 6.3 yards per attempt. You know, the Kansas transfer this season, 57% completion rate, 3 touchdowns, 6 picks for 6.2 yards per attempt. New Mexico State 1-5 after their 21-7 home loss to FIU. Aggies produced just 221 yards offensively against a down Golden Panthers team. They ran for only 82 yards on 31 carries. Now on defense, New Mexico State allowed 344 yards to FIU with 162 rushing on 45 carries. Diego Pavia, 57% completions in the loss with 6.1 yards per attempt. Season low here. For the season here, Pavia, 40% completions, no touchdowns, 4 picks with 4.1 yards per attempt. It's really tough to back the Aggies. You know, when you lose at home to FIU and then against a rebuilding Nevada team by double digits. Aggies giving up 4.6 yards per rush this season. The Lobos like to pound the rock. The play here will be New Mexico at -6.5. Northern Illinois versus Eastern Michigan college football pick Saturday. Northern Illinois fell to 1-5 after their 52-32 home defeat to Toledo. Huskies fell behind 45-7 after 3 quarters with 14 points allowed on interception returns. NIU had a -4 turnover margin. Offensively, the ground game generated 140 yards on 41 carries. Ethan Hampton hit on 61% of his passes, 2 touchdowns, 4 picks, and a season-low 5.8 yards per pass attempt. On the season, Hampton 59% completion rate, 6.5 per attempt. Eastern Michigan 4-2 after their 45-23 road win at Western Michigan. Eagles were up 35-7 at the half. Good defensive performance by EMU, holding the Broncos to just 299 yards with 208 passing on 40 attempts. Taylor Powell completed 66% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, a season high, 9.8 yards per attempt. He returned after dealing with a shoulder injury during the win at Arizona State on the year. Powell 66% to completion rate on this season, 7.9 yards per attempt. Now NIU is struggling defending the pass this year, giving up 291 yards passing, 8.7 yards per attempt. Healthy Paul makes a difference here. The play here will be Eastern Michigan -2.5. Ohio versus Western Michigan college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Ohio is 3-3 after their 55-34 home win to Akron. Bobcats a season high of 561 yards against an FBS school this season. They limited the Zips to on the ground but allowed 418 passing yards on 54 attempts. Producer Rourke 89% completion rate, 16 yards per attempt in the win. Rourke's season-wide numbers: 71% completions, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks, 9.1 yards per attempt. Western Michigan 2-4 after their 45-23 home defeat to Eastern Michigan. Broncos gained only 299 yards in defeat, running for 91 yards on 36 carries. They did surrender 413 yards to the Eagles with 293 passing on 30 attempts. Broncos did fall behind 35-7 at the half. Jack Selipek, a poor 37% completion rate with season low 5.2 yards per attempt. Now this season, Selipek is completing 50%, 6.1 yards per attempt. Rourke, the better form, the better quarterback. The play here will be Ohio -1. Old Dominion versus Coastal Carolina college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. Old Dominion drops to 2-4 after their 38-24 home defeat to Liberty. Monarchs had a season-high 415 yards in defeat. Defense struggled, surrendering 478 yards with 210 rushing on 39 carries, 268 passing on 28 attempts. Hayden Wolf completed 59% of his throws, 6.5 yards per attempt on the season. He's completing 56%, 7 yards per attempt. Coastal Carolina 6-0 after their 28-21 road win at UL Monroe. Chanticleers built a 28-14 lead at the half but went scoreless in the second half. The offense produced 433 yards, 187 rushing on 30 carries. They did surrender 279 passing yards to the Warhawks on 31 attempts. Quarterback Grayson McCall completed 68% of his passes in the win with a touchdown and 8.8 yards per attempt. McCall on the year hitting 69% of his passes, 9.9 yards per attempt. Second road game for the Monarchs, and on the road, the team is averaging just 316 yards of offense and giving up 522 yards. Play here will be Coastal Carolina -11. Rice versus FAU college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Rice, they're 3-2 after their 28-24 home win to UAB. Owls win despite a season-low 209 yards. The team ran for 105 yards on 36 carries. On defense, they limited the Blazers to only 3 yards a carry on the ground and returned a fumble 4 yards for a touchdown. TJ McMahon completed 65% of his passes in the win with a touchdown, but 6.1 yards per attempt. FAU 2-4 with their 45-28 road win at North Texas. Owls finished with 432 yards rushing. 432 yards. They ran the ball for 137 yards on 29 carries. Defensively, though, FAU gave up 481 yards to the Mean Green, 300 yards rushing on 51 carries. N'Kosi Perry did complete only 52% of his passes, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, 5.9 yards per attempt. On the season, Perry is completing 57%, 7.4 yards per attempt. Now, FAU's offensive production, the key here, the Rice Owls surrendering 5.5 yards a carry on the ground to opponents, and FAU running for 5.1 per attempt. And also, Perry is a difference here. The player will be FAU at -3.5. San Jose State versus Fresno State college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. San Jose State 4-1 after their 40-7 home win to UNLV. Spartans moved the football for 433 yards in the win with 203 rushing on 36 carries. Strong defensive performance here for San Jose State, who held the Rebels to 213 yards with 52 rushing on 37 carries. They did knock out the UNLV starting quarterback early in the game Hawaii transfer quarterback Chevan Cordero, a season-high 67% completions, 2 touchdowns, 8.5 yards per attempt. On the season, Cordero, 58% completions for 8.1 yards per attempt. Fresno State falls to 1-4 after their 40-20 road defeat at Boise State. Again, another poor offensive showing for the Bulldogs, producing just 233 yards, 99 rushing on 35 carries. Defensively, Fresno State allowed Boise State to run for 316 yards on 52 carries. Logan Fife forced into action his starting quarterback Jake Hayner still out. Fife completed 56% of his passes in the loss with 2 interceptions, only 5.4 yards per attempt. On the season, Fife, though, 69% completion rate, 4 touchdowns, 7.3 yards per attempt. Now, Fife now home after back-to-back road games. On the road, the Spartans are giving up 176 yards rushing, 5.1 yards per carry. Bulldogs have run well at home, nearly 5 yards a carry. The play here, Fresno State plus 8.5. Texas State versus Troy. College football pick. This is Saturday. Texas State improved to 3-3 after their 36-24 home win to Appalachian State. Bobcats had a +1 turnover margin powered by a 94-yard touchdown interception return. Defensively, the Bobcats held the Mountaineers to 41 rushing yards on 21 carries. They did give up 395 yards passing on 53 attempts. Arkansas State transfer quarterback Lane Hatcher, a season-high 72% completion rate, 7.2 yards per attempt. On the season, Hatcher, 62% completions, 6.7 per attempt. Troy improved to 4-2 after their 27-10 home win to Southern Miss. Trojans win despite a season-low 338 yards offensively. Troy powered by a strong defensive effort, holding the Golden Eagles to 205 yards with 48 rushing on 26 carries. Starting quarterback Gunnar Watson questionable and missed last game. West Virginia transfer quarterback here Jarrett Doege completed 71% of his passes, a touchdown, a pick, about 10 yards per pass attempt. Bobcats defense has held opponents to just 354 yards, 4 yards per carry on the ground, and only 6.2 yards per attempt. Bobcats offense rushing for only 1.8 yards a carry. Trojans do put heavy pressure on the quarterback, averaging 3.3 sacks a game, and they force 2 turnovers a game. With Texas State run game kind of struggling right now, it'll be tough sledding throwing the football. The play here will be Texas State and Troy under 48.5 points. UConn versus Ball State. College football pick Saturday. UConn moved to 3-4 after their 33-12 road win at FIU. Huskies moved the football for 402 yards, rushing for 295 on 46 carries. On defense, Connecticut did allow 153 rushing yards on 23 carries. Quarterback Zion Turner completed 74% of his passes, only 5.4 yards per attempt. Ball State 3-3 with their 17-16 road win at Central Michigan, a season-low 250 yards offensively for the Cardinals. Defensively, they held the Chippewas to 240 yards, 133 of it rushing on 49 carries. John Paddock completed a season-low 55%, 4.5 yards per attempt. On the season, Paddock completing 64%, 6.4 yards per attempt. Back-to-back road games for the Huskies, who have some poor defensive numbers away from home. Cardinals, good offensive showing at home to Northern Illinois and Western Michigan. The player will be Ball State here at -9. UL Monroe versus South Alabama. College football pick for Saturday. UL Monroe here 2-4 after their 28-21 home defeat to Coastal Carolina. Warhawks had a season-high 424 yards of offense against FBS teams here this season, with 145 rushing on 39 carries. UL Monroe gave up over 6 yards a carry on the ground, plus surrendered 246 passing yards on 28 carries. Chandler Rogers completed 27 of 30 passes, 9.3 yards per attempt. He tossed 2 touchdowns. Rogers on the season, 69% completion rate, 7.6 yards per attempt. South Alabama improved to 4-1 after their 20-17 road win at Louisiana. Jaguars put on a great defensive performance, holding the Raging Cajuns just 276 yards. USA limited on the ground, just 116 rushing yards on 37 carries. Toledo transfer quarterback Carter Bradley completed a season-low 44% with a pick and a season-low 6 yards per attempt. Warhawks get good production through the air, and Rogers impressive against the Chanticleers. The play here will be UL Monroe at +17. Utah State versus Colorado State. College football pick for Saturday. Utah State 2-4 after their 34-27 home win to the Air Force. The Aggies moved the football for 414 yards, 199 of it rushing on 38 carries. On defense, Utah State allowed 264 rushing yards on 55 carries. Arkansas State quarterback transfer Logan Bonner here was lost for the season here, and he was a transfer from Arkansas State with a lower body injury. It was Cooper Legas completed 78% in the win with 9.3 yards per attempt. Season-wide, Legas 62% completion rate, 4 touchdowns, 4 picks, and 6.2 yards per attempt. Colorado State improved to 1-4 with their 17-14 road win at Nevada. Another poor offensive showing for the Rams, just 255 yards. Rams did run for 177 yards on 133 carries. They committed 3 turnovers and forced 2 away from the Wolfpack. On defense, CSU limited the Wolfpack ground attack and allowed 244 passing yards on 42 attempts. Brandon Fowler Nicolosi completed 50% of his passes, 2 picks, and only 3.5 yards per attempt. This season, Nicolosi just 46% completion rate with 5.2 yards per attempt. Now, Colorado State is surrendering 5.2 sacks and 2.4 turnovers a game. Their run game is not helping their young quarterback with just 2.2 yards per rush. The quarterback change and upgrade here for the Aggies. The play here will be on Utah State at -11.